Hey everybody, time to talk about more inexpensive records, also known as cheap heat. These are records that don't cost a whole lot. They shred, but they don't cost a whole lot. By cost, I mean like you can usually get a decent copy for less than 20 bucks via Discogs, or maybe 10 bucks in your local store, less than. This pile that I'm going to go through, I'm going to try to talk about soul and funk LPs, not my area of expertise. Nonetheless, I feel like I still have something to offer in that regard, but there's a lot of people out there who know way more about it than I do. Most of the soul, funk, R&B records I have are pretty rare and not inexpensive, so I can't talk about those in a cheap heat video. But there's a lot of stuff out there that, I don't know, seems to get passed over, and stuff that I think is really great. And it isn't jazz, it isn't fusion, although some people might call some of the records I'm talking about in this video jazz or fusion, and I wouldn't argue. But I'll preface those. And of course, you know, there's a lot of big names. I'm going to go through some of those as well. I don't want to leave those out because they were kind of central to my development as a listener and a music fan, especially when I was a kid. Anyway, what we're listening to now is one of my favorite all-time finds. Big Black, conga player. Not the punk band, but the conga player. You can read the title. This is a sidelong piece that just kills. I love it. It's like almost like a Bitches Brew kind of a thing. The rest of the album's kind of, decent soul jazz type stuff, but I just love this particular track, and it goes on for 20 minutes. And the interesting thing about it is one of the backing musicians on it is Owen Marshall, who's a very, very interesting musician. He was on a bunch of, I think, music on the albums on the Black Jazz label as a sideman. He also did his own very strange solo LP, Captain Puff. I think he's still around. But anyway, he had input into this. He plays something on this. I'm not sure what. And I just think that's really interesting. And I got this for like $2. He plays hosophone on this. So there you go. Anyway, Big Black, Lion Walk is what we're listening to. All right, so I'm going to go through some really great records in the genre of soul, funk, R&B, edging into jazz because I'm a jazz guy mostly. I'm going to go through some of the big names first, but again, talking about releases that I feel like don't really get the kind of props that they deserve. And the first band, for me anyway, Earth, Wind and Fire. Love these guys and gals. A lot of people don't know this, they're an offshoot of a band called the Pharaohs in Chicago, and that band was loosely associated with Phil Coren and Sun Ra, people like that, and you can still hear traces of that on this record. This was their 4th LP. They did 2 for Warner Brothers and 1 for Columbia before this came out. And this is just an amazing, amazing record. There's an interpretation of a Brazilian composer, Edu Lobo, one of his pieces called Zanzibar. It's like a 14-minute long rhythmic adventure. It's amazing. It changed my life. And it might just change yours. Anyway, if you ever see this, Head to the Sky, get it. It's before they became hugely popular. And people just don't seem to talk about that album that much. Another great band that had a huge influence on me as a kid, and whose albums you could still find some of them for cheap, not all of them. This one's cheap because it gets overlooked. And it was actually a movie soundtrack. And Mr. Mean, of course I'm talking about the Ohio Players, and from Cincinnati, and there's so much musically going on in Cincinnati, it's crazy. Bootsy Collins is from there, James Brown's based there for years, Smash Records, Thrust Records, all these little record labels that just did an unusually large amount of really cool music. Anyway, this is a great record. It's almost all instrumental, super funky. Everything the Ohio Players ever did was super funky. But this one really takes the cake, and again, it's not one that people know about as much, and I'm pretty sure you can get a copy for $5 to $10, online or not. I found this in Pittsburgh, actually, at the Attic. I think I paid like $5 for it. And if you've ever been there, that place is not cheap. Great record, and one of the late 70s, and you just don't expect it to be really that good. Here's another record that a lot of people sort of pass over. I'll turn this down just a bit. And it's actually an offshoot of Funkadelic. Glenn Goins is the bass player in Funkadelic and Parliament, and this is his band. And Quasar. There's a bunch of bands called Quasar, but this is Glenn Goins' band called Quasar. I think they did another record, I'm not sure. This is their debut. It's unbelievably funky, and it's got a lot of the Parliament Funkadelic people on it. You know, I could read names, but that's just boring. This is a really fantastic record, some really funky instrumentals on it, and a lot of people don't know about it. And again, I've had multiple copies of this record, and I don't think any of them cost more than like $8. And again, from the Attic in Pittsburgh, a really cool record store if you're in that part of the world. Met a guy in the Attic, and I had this record, and we started talking, and he asked me about it, and he didn't know it, and he played it on the in-house turntable and flipped. So there you go. Some musicians associated with jazz, more broadly, have gone on to record amazing funk records. And you know, I always hate that talk. When are they going to get back to jazz? They've never left. They just want to do something different. It's all right. Everything's going to be okay after the funk. Anyway, George Duke, absolutely one of my all-time favorite musicians. Played with Frank Zappa for years. You know, just an amazing genius of a musician. Recorded all those great records for the MPS label out of Germany. Most of them are available in the US. They were pressed, some of them at US pressings. Then he joined Epic Records, an offshoot of Columbia, and recorded the first two records he did. This one is called From Me to You, and I think the second one was called Reach for It. Both really excellent examples of jazzy funk. That's just, you know, dynamite. You just put this stuff on, it jumps out of the speakers. George Duke had a big personality and a big sense of humor, and it really comes through in his funky music. And I love this record. It's really great. Another guy who is better known as a jazz musician, but definitely recorded some very worthy funk stuff, is Lenny White, fellow left-handed drummer. This is his record called Streamline. I think it's from the late 70s, and it's 78, and it's a Mizell production, produced by Don Mizell, executive producer. Larry Dunn from Earth, Wind & Fire also had considerable input into it. Anyway, this features Lenny White's working band, which is one of the reasons why it's so good. There's two guitar players, keyboards. One of Marcus Miller's early appearance on record is this record, and this is just killing all the way through. You know, I pulled it out and I was a little skeptical. I've seen this literally for 50 cents. It's a remarkably good record. It's about half instrumental, half vocal, but it's all really good. And don't sleep on Lenny White's records. The ones before that are more fusion, straight up, but Streamline is, it's not sellout. It's just really good, funky music. Another artist who did some really amazing and outstanding, really, jazz releases before she moved into the funky realm, the realm of the funk, Patrice Russian. And this is her third solo record, and it's called Shout It Out. And you can see how much I bought it for, $2 at one of my local places. It's called We Buy Music down there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Anyway, again, I think she was accused of selling out, but if you listen to this, it's pretty uncompromised and it's very funky. It's a little bit more jazzy than the George Duke and Lenny White albums I displayed, but it's still outstandingly funky and really a great listen. And great people on it. Al McKay from Earth, Wind & Fire. Charles Meeks, James Gadsden on drums. You can't get any better than that. Bill Summers on percussion. Just a fine record. couple of vocal tracks, but largely instrumental, but 100% funk. I'm going to get into some groups here now. Some of these groups are a little less well known, but maybe they should be better known. The first one is Chocolate Milk out of New Orleans, and I have two of their records. Their first one is not inexpensive at all. It's pretty expensive. This one, their later stuff tends to be a little bit less expensive. I think the first one has some big time samples on it, that's why, but it's like a $20 record. This is almost as good as that first one. It's their fourth, actually, and it's called We're All in This Together, and it's really excellent. There are a couple of ballads on it, but even the ballads are good. And the name to remember on this record, the whole band's good, and mark my words, these guys can really play. They're from New Orleans. They've got that funky New Orleans thing going on. But Alan Toussaint was highly involved in their development, produced the record, wrote several of the tunes. So if you like Alan Toussaint stuff, you're going to love Chocolate Milk. You really ought to check them out. And they were quite prolific. And like I said, after their first record, I believe their eponymous records, the ones just titled Chocolate Milk, were actually later. Everything I've heard by them is really good, and it's definitely got that sort of slinky New Orleans syncopated feel. Highly recommended. Another band that's really obscure but has a famous member in it is Hidden Strength, and I think they're from somewhere in the South, Atlanta or someplace like that. And you can't really see him here, but this fellow here in the white suit, that is none other than star jazz trombonist Ray Anderson. And people might think that Ray Anderson puts a funk thing on, but actually Ray Anderson is all about funk, and he is deep, deep, deep in funk. And I love his funky music. I love his out jazz as well. But this is an early recording with him as a band member. Hidden Strength was one of those big sort of 8-member bands, with a horn section and everything from down south. And this came out on United Artists, and I believe it came out as a private issue first, and then United Artists picked it up later. The private issue version is very expensive. This is very cheap. I got this again at We Buy Music down there in Albuquerque. I remember finding it and buying it there. It's a really good record, jazzy, but mostly funk. And it's got Ray Anderson on trombone, great vocals, great percussion, great keyboards. There's a couple of Moog solos on this that are just off the chain. Hidden Strength, not a well-known band. Really great though. Here's another band that is actually fairly well-known, but under a different name. And I used to own several records by them, but sold them or traded them. New Birth out of Louisville, Kentucky. They were known as the Nightlighters before they became New Birth. And the Nightlighters were primarily an instrumental band. Turn it down just a little bit so I have to shout at you. The Nightlighters are primarily, but not totally, instrumental. And I'm always surprised at how inexpensive these are. These are a little bit on the high end of the inexpensive range. You might pay $15 for a nice copy, but they're really worth getting. They're very funky, and like I said, largely instrumental, but super cool. Lots of good solos, lots of great playing. The producer, Harvey Fuqua, was a well-known player in Louisville, Kentucky. Of course, co-led this band, led the New Birth, produced a bunch of stuff. But these records are great, and you don't see them around too often, but at least I don't. But I highly recommend any of them. And they stopped being the Nightlighters in the early 70s, 73, 74, and they just totally shifted over into being called New Birth. Much more vocally oriented, but no less great. Here's a band that made a splash early and then sort of faded into obscurity. I'm not sure why. They were once known as the Fabulous Counts, and later on they just were called the Counts. So their first record had this great funky instrumental called Jan Jan on it. I've got it in the stacks back there. It's not cheap. They followed that up with a really funky instrumental record called What's Up Front That Counts. That's also not cheap. But their third and fourth records are really great. They're a little bit less jazz funk and more funk. This one, Love Sign, has got a 9-minute instrumental medley on it that contains snippets, compositional sections from What's Up Front That Counts. And it's worth getting for that alone, but the rest of the album's really great. Really, really slapping, funky music. This was their final record, Funk Pump, and they used to play this on the radio when I was a kid in Florida, and I could never figure out who the heck it was. And somehow I caught on that it was the Counts, and this has been in and out of the collection a couple of times. But really excellent funky music, and not a well-known band for some reason. People really go for the first two, but the third and fourth, worth getting. They're from Atlanta or Macon, Georgia, I'm not sure which. Really excellent stuff, great playing. Can't say enough good stuff about them. Now there's a lot of funky rock out there, or rock and funk out there, and it's, you know, now a thing, you know, Blackrock, it's referred to as. I love that stuff. And it just, you know, it's something that, I mean, the first thing I heard as a kid practically was my older brother's Jimi Hendrix records. And so a lot of this stuff, Blackrock stuff, kind of follows along from that. And you got bands like Living Colour, 24/7 Spies, big fan of all those bands. They were kind of, for me, after the vinyl age was over. They're more CD bands. I have CDs of those bands, but not albums. But there are some artists that came along a little bit earlier that sort of epitomize that same feeling. And some of their records just get passed over. I'm not quite sure why. But I'm going to bring up 3 people. Actually 2 solo artists and a group that epitomize that feeling, that excitement of mixing funk with rock, and just going for it and kind of falling through the cracks. And the first guy is Greg Wright. I don't know whatever happened to this guy. Another Louisiana guy though, and this is a fantastic record. It's called Kempson, and it's got all kinds of really cool players on it. They got the drummer from Louisiana LaRue on it, which is sort of a band that mixed rock and Cajun music together. But this is all funky rock, or rock and funk, and there's a big long 9-minute track on this, the title song. But it's got all these great New Orleans players on it, and it's just really good. And Greg Wright's very Hendrix influenced, both in his singing and his guitar playing. And again, this is still cheap, and it's on a small label, the Record Company of the South. And people just tend to pass this over, and I think this is really good. I would put this right up there with the Edwin Birdsong records, frankly. It's not as fuzzed out as those, but it's definitely in the same vein. Now, a record that is as wild as the Edwin Birdsong records is a Philly record, actually. And another one I found at We Buy Music here in Albuquerque. Not here in Albuquerque, because I'm not in Albuquerque, but here in New Mexico. And it's this, Spiritual Concept on Philly International. And this band was led by a guy named T-Life, composer, guitarist, keyboardist, singer. And this blew me away. I just got it because I wanted to hear some funk and soul, and it was cheap. It cost me $4 when I bought it, and hopefully it will only cost you $4. This, it turns out, is a crazy Hendrix-inspired early sort of take on the whole Blackrock thing. And once again, I must mention Edwin Birdsong as sort of a reference point. Just that wild, distorted guitar and just sort of crazy visionary lyrics and great singing, great playing. Not your usual sort of humdrum R&B experience. These guys were really reaching for something else. Highly recommended. Spiritual Concept. It's on Philly International. It's on a large label. Not a lot of credits. I think my album has an insert with the lyrics and the credits. So really worth hunting this one down. And I really like the cover. It kind of reminds me of The Outer Limits. It's kind of spooky with these rocks and this emptiness. And then the guy sitting off in the distance. What is that? I really love this record. It's fantastic. Another guy that nobody seems to pay attention to, and I think this guy is a giant in the world of funk, but he mixed funk and blues and rock in equal portions. And he was also one of Frank Zappa's favorite musicians and actually played on several Zappa's records, played and sang. He's Johnny Guitar Watson. I have a bunch of his records. This is my favorite by far. Ain't That a Bitch? It's just really funny. This guy, like George Duke, has a huge sense of humor. It really comes through in his music. And this is a fine record. An interesting side note, one of the saxophone players on this plays several solos too, is Paul Dunmall, who went on to become sort of the avatar of the avant-garde jazz movement in the UK. He's like a giant over there. He's like really highly regarded, and as well he should be. He's an amazing player, but it cracked me up to see his name in the credits on a Johnny Guitar Watson record. It's just one of those things. He came over to the States and did this. So the record's wrapping up. I might wrap this up too. I was going to show some more jazzy stuff, but I think I'll save those for later. One last record I want to mention, and a band I want to mention, mostly an 80s band. This is James Chance, also known as The Contortions. This is a really fantastic funky record, and most of the guys on this record went on to form a band called Defunct, which I used to have several of their albums and sold them or traded them or something. They're not in the stacks anymore, but this is a really funky record, really outstanding. And James Chance is a real character, plays this squawky sax and has this sort of strangled singing style. It takes a little getting used to, but very funky nonetheless. And Defunct is a band you should pay attention to. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for paying attention. I hope I added something to your already existing knowledge stack in terms of funk, R&B, and soul. But that's the kind of stuff I like. Definitely more in the jazz realm than some. And I'll come back with some more cheap heat videos in the future. Thank you. Bye.